Usually little retrieves or slower retrieves have a tendency to stay near the bottom than real fast retrieves, although you will catch those trevally with a quicker retrieve. When you're sight casting, it's also going to be kind of, it depends. You want to get the fly out ahead of the fish. We generally don't like to hit the fish right on the head because they'll spook 90% of the time. And you want to put it somewhere 8 to 10 feet out ahead of them, let that fly get on the bottom. And then by the time it gets to the bottom, you can start, with a little retrieve and gauge the fish's reaction to your fly for what to do next.
That was Rick Lee breaking down some tips and tricks for bonefish in Hawaii. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. I'm in the process of putting together a trip for Salt and Christmas Island this year. If you want to find out more info on this trip and get on the list for an upcoming trip giveaway, go to wetflyswing.com/salt and I'll get you some more information there. In today's episode, I talk with Rick Lee, the man behind bonefishhawaii.com. We talk about the most important gear you need to stay safe and to find bones, talk about the difference between the Hawaiian Islands and where to go, and some tips on spotting and casting to those fish. Lots of good stuff in this one. You don't want to miss this, as Rick describes a go-to plan and DIY style trip you can do if you're on your way to Hawaii this year. Since 1977, the Fly Fishing and Tying Journal has long been considered the angler's magazine, with original how-tos and technical articles written by the best trout and steelhead anglers in the West. FTJ is committed to sharing exceptionally written essays, fiction, poetry, and in-depth guides to fly fishing destinations. FTJ is one of my go-to magazines, and if you haven't checked it out recently, you can get started by calling 1-800-541-9498 or heading over to the web at ftjangler.com. So, without further ado, here's Rick Lee. So, okay, good. Well, I think we're good to go to get started. You, as far as if people have questions, is there a place to direct them just to your website or?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to reach us is through our website. That's bonefishhawaii.com, or you can shoot us an email, and that's info@bonefishhawaii.com. We'll get back with you, excuse me, as soon as we're able. And if we're out on the water, it may take a couple of hours, but generally we'll get right back at you with questions or answers or anything we can help you with. So,
okay, good. Then I think we're all on the same page. We know what we're going to be chatting about. Yeah. So yeah, my conversations are, usually pretty casual, and I kind of let them go where they go. So I think, the focus, and it sounds like you can answer any of those questions that come up on Hawaii. So that's good. There's not many people out there, right? Is there a ton of people out there guiding in Hawaii?
Actually, it's been increasing exponentially over the last couple of years. We fished here in Hawaii with flies for years and years and years, from kind of the late 70s on, when we were high school kids, and kind of just picked up fly fishing on a couple of trout trips up to the mainland, and never saw another angler on the flats for a couple of decades. But I don't know, about 10 or 12 years ago, there started to be a little bit more interest in the fishery here, and people started figuring it out a little bit better. And there was a couple of guides that spent a lot of time and effort pioneering the fishery from a guiding standpoint. But most of them spent more time promoting themselves and promoting their businesses than they did many of the other aspects with the fishery here in Hawaii. So we're about 1,500,000 people on Oahu, and the state is pushing 2 million, plus, a million visitors a year here to Hawaii. So there's a lot of people visiting the island, so don't be under the impression that you're going to show up on a deserted tropical island busting at the seams with fish. I mean, this is hardcore urban fishing, very highly pressured resource.
No, I hear you. And we'll dig into some of that too, because I think that's we might talk a little DIY and but basically just give people that are going there a good perspective on, what it might take to have a chance. Really, I mean, we're not even talking about maybe, catching, tons of fish, but yeah, just have an opportunity would be amazing. So yeah, we're going to jump into all that. Before we kind of get there, can you talk about how you first, got into fly fishing, and then how Bonefish Hawaii came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up very near the beach, over near the Kahala Hotel, on the south shore of Oahu, and was in the water every day, whether it was, surfing like mad or diving or fishing. And about the time we got close to being in high school, I went up on a couple of summer trips to the Rocky Mountain West and had a chance to do some fly fishing for trout. And so all this fishing experience, years and years of spin fishing and diving and what have you here on Oahu, and this fly fishing piece all kind of came together at the same time. And about the same time, I think it was maybe when I was a junior in high school, got a chance to go down to Christmas Island. And, back at that time, it was a really new resource that had no pressure on it whatsoever with hordes of bonefish. And so I learned pretty quickly what the drill was to catch bonefish on flies. And, it's kind of led to a love affair, not only with saltwater fly fishing, but fly fishing in general for, going on 40 years now. I'm going to date myself, man. I graduated from high school in 1982, and the first year I went to Christmas Island was 1979, and that was just when I was just learning about how to catch bonefish on flies. So.
Oh, cool. So 79, and what now? When you look at Christmas Island, when you compare what that felt like that first trip versus say you go there now, what is the difference?
Well, the neat thing about it is the people have a much better life now than they did at that time. They have better food supplies. They have a more consistent air charter that goes down there weekly. And, so they're enjoying their lives, I think, more than they perhaps did at that time. The flats are definitely more crowded. Fortunately, it's a 145 square mile lagoon down there, so you can still get it all to yourself on a pretty regular basis. The neat thing about Hawaii back in the day was, although there was a lot of fishing pressure, nobody was fishing for these bonefish with flies, and so they all ate. Whereas now many of the fish are educated. Bonefish are really long-lived, and so they've most likely, if they're in urban Honolulu, seen at least one fly, if not been hooked and caught. And so they're much, much more difficult to hook now than they were back in the day.
Okay. So yeah, that's a big difference. And then what about, we're going to dig into a little bit on the islands, but if you just think about Hawaii, you hear, and I've been doing some destination episodes and things like that, and, Hawaii hasn't come up that much. I mean, how is Hawaii different than, say, any other place where you're going to get bonefish?
The neat thing about Hawaii is you can tie a bonefish day or couple of days into a family trip or a business trip or just a general vacation. It's not a destination that you just are going to go to catch bonefish. In fact, I would say bonefish would almost be a secondary interest in being here. But if you're headed to Hawaii, bring along some boots and your rod and a box of flies and, be ready when you get the chance. I mean, there could be an opportunity when you're on a drive around the island with the family or stopped for lunch somewhere. And, you could potentially hook the biggest bonefish of your life right out in front of where you're staying. So there's always the opportunity. Just don't get too hung up in catching 20 a day and seeing hordes of bonefish tailing on a white sandy flat in ankle deep water, because it's not going to happen here.
Cool. No, that's good to hear. So I think, that might be a good place to start. I think we want to circle around for sure and talk about, maybe where, maybe a little Christmas Island where you fish more often, but, I'm actually heading to Maui, and I know a lot of people go to Maui, and it's one of the islands out there, maybe not known as the greatest. I think it's known as kind of deep water and stuff like that. But could we talk about Maui just a little bit, and maybe talk about how if somebody was going there, this week, how they might do it, try to find a fish or at least get a cast into the water?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I hope my advice works, Dave, if you're headed out that way this week.
No, well, I expect...
It's blowing 30 today outside.
Exactly. So. No, I wasn't expecting to do...
So there's bonefish on all the islands. Some islands have more bonefish habitat that lends itself to fly fishing than others. Because the islands go from youngest at the Big Island to oldest at Kauai, there's a really interesting change in the islands, going from basically a lava volcano to fringing reef to eventually, like atolls in the Central Pacific, just a big hole in the middle with the vestiges of that fringing reef, like we would find at Christmas Island. But Oahu and Maui kind of seem to be right in the sweet spot where there's still beautiful mountains and tributaries and all that, but there's also some pretty darn good flats. Oahu has the lion's share in the islands, but Maui still has some pretty big ones. So my recommendation to people is depending on the side of the island you're on, maybe just surf a little on Google Maps. Any place that you can find water that's knee to thigh deep, there's going to be bonefish. Most of the flats on Maui have a tendency to fish at lower tides because as the tide level rises and the trade winds blow in the afternoon, most of the flats will dirty up. But there's some flats over near Kihei on the windward side of the island. There's also quite a few flats between Lahaina and Ka'anapali on the southern side of the island. And none of them are what you might envision perhaps fishing in the Bahamas or Cuba or Belize. But they are unique to Hawaii and they do hold reasonable numbers of fish. A lot of the guests that will go over to Maui actually will do a lot of blind casting, and that's something that a lot of the local anglers also have adopted. They'll find a fishy looking spot that, is knee to thigh deep. Even if they can't really see the bottom, they'll just, spray blind casts out in all directions and move a little and then, just kind of continue on through an area that looks fishy. And they're actually relatively successful in doing that. There are occasions on Maui where you can find fish either closer to shore at really low tides when there's limited wave action and wind action when you can't sight fish to fish. But that would be kind of more the exception to the rule. But you can definitely catch bonefish there. And then there's also a whole variety of other fish that will take a fly as well.
Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah, there's the I'm not even going to pronounce the name, but the triggerfish, right? How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, actually, yeah. The Hawaii state fish is the humuhumu nuku nuku a pua'a, and the Hawaiian language translation of that is fish with a nose like a pig.
Oh,
and if you've
and teeth that are screwy too.
Yeah, if you've ever seen a trigger, they're not the most beautiful fish, but they've got some of the most distinctive and attractive markings of any fish, and that. Humuhumu nuku nuku a pua'a is actually known also as a Picasso triggerfish, and they're found throughout the Indo-Pacific. And they're the main triggerfish species here in Hawaii in shallow water.
Oh, cool. Now, this is awesome. And I think if we have time, we might touch a little bit on some other species. I've talked about bones. More. We've had a few episodes and, we haven't gone in deep. So I would like to maybe talk about, let's just focus on bones because I think it's maybe the species people talk about for, especially if they haven't done saltwater before. But it sounds like maybe there's some other fish like triggerfish or maybe just as easy to, what would you say? How are bones as far as catching them versus other species? Or do you think for a first timer, would bones be the best thing to target?
Absolutely. And, getting back to the blind casting piece in Maui, there's a variety of other fish that are ravenous for flies if you can find them. The bluefin trevally probably being the most prominent. They're around in large numbers, particularly during the summer, but all year round, and they'll gobble any kind of a fly that's moving. There's also a variety of goatfishes that are around that you may have seen those. They've got little barbells under their chin and they're feeding in the same habitats as bonefish are, kind of searching around with those barbells on the bottom. They'll take flies like crazy, and a whole variety of other reef fish occasionally on the smaller bonefish flies you can hook up as well. But, bonefish are really the trophy species near shore here on Oahu and throughout the islands. And the cool thing about them is they're really, really big here in Hawaii. It's not uncommon at all to get, 6 to 10 pound fish. And, a 7 or 8 pound fish in Hawaii literally will take you 150 yards into your backing with the drag cranked all the way down. They're really, really strong fish, very difficult to land. And many of them will be in areas where there's large coral heads, which, double the action once you get hooked up to one and he's in the rocks, 100 yards away and you're running after him on a flat with waves breaking. It's nice. Pretty dynamic.
That's amazing. Yeah, this is cool. This is getting started. It sounds like I love these ones where, the more we talk, the more questions pop up. And, you kind of remind me when we talk about species. I had Peter Morse on. He was down in Australia and he was talking about how the biggest challenge there is, what rod to start out with and what flies to bring. It sounds like here, maybe you can break down the rods a little bit. What do we need? And as far as flies, and could I just go out there with a specific fly and maybe have a chance at bonefish or triggers or other species?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're pretty big fans of 7 and 8 weights. You don't really need a lot more rod in Hawaii for the fact that primarily you're going to be positioning yourself to be casting across or slightly downwind, not fighting into it. People do bring occasionally heavier rods, but we've never really found a need for it. Floating lines are the ticket definitely here in Hawaii. As long as it's a monocore type of bonefish line particularly, you're going to be successful with it. Stay away from the sink tips or the intermediate lines. They have their own inherent set of challenges. And in our rocky environment here in Hawaii, you're going to be wishing you had a floating line for the most part. Leaders anywhere between 9 and say 11 feet, taper down to kind of a minimum of about 15 pounds. You can occasionally go lighter with really small flies in certain situations, but I would say, stick with 15 or 20. We love fluorocarbon because it disappears. It sinks way faster, ties great knots, and it's pretty durable in the rocks. So that would be your initial startup. And don't fool around with a reel that's got less than 100 yards of backing, or you'll be sorry you did. You definitely want a good saltwater safe reel. Yeah, not that you'll necessarily need 200 yards, but it's a very rare occasion when you're not into the backing, even on the smallest Hawaii bonefish. And it's very usual that your arm is aching from cranking in a big long run by a bonefish here in Hawaii because he's so far out. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, as far as flies go, I always tell people kind of match the environment that you're fishing in. If you're on a dark bottom, use a dark fly. If you're on a lighter bottom, use a brighter fly. Some of the colors that people do well on here in Hawaii would be, of course, tan or some variation thereof. Fish in Hawaii love darker flies, browns or olive greens. They also love orange flies. And those kind of all tie back to specific prey items that they're hunting for here in Hawaii. The bonefish are pretty varied with regard to their interest in eating, and that'll depend on the flat that you're on. They eat a lot of crabs, of course, like bonefish anywhere. Mantis shrimp are on the menu in a lot of different places, and you may have seen some of the mantis patterns that people are coming up with now that are pretty effective. There's also a whole variety of endemic shrimp in Hawaii, which are commonly referred to by the Hawaiian name opai. And they're generally translucent, and they might be clear or speckled, or occasionally even, as in the case of the opai ula, orange in color. And thus the orange fly is real effective in a lot of the nearshore waters. And then the fly also that I tell people never to leave out of their box, especially if they're blind casting, is the deceiver. Particularly a deceiver that's tan on the back and white on the bottom, or yellow on the back and white on the bottom. And that will mimic a small goatfish that we were talking about earlier called owama. And the owama are around in numbers during the mid to late summer, and pretty much everything on the reef is eating them. They're like candy to just about every predatory fish out there, but they're also around the rest of the year, and the fish are always keyed in on them. So if you can show them something like a deceiver that darts around like a small goatfish, you may find some success on a whole variety of different fish.
Okay, cool. And as far as the lines, do you have a company that you would recommend, or a name of a line?
Well, we love all of the stuff that Rio makes, and we've been big fans of Rio for many years. We also use a lot of airflow lines as well. And so I would not hesitate on either of those. I had good luck historically with Scientific Anglers lines, but don't have a working relationship with them as I once did. But they're all going to be good ones. Some will last a little longer than others. Yeah. There's also some that have a little bit more of a forward taper than others. A lot of the quick shooter lines, so to speak, that Rio makes have a 33 to 35 foot head. So it's going to be good for loading quick, might be a little better out of the boat maybe than the traditional bonefish lines that might have a little bit longer, maybe 45-foot head, which is a little bit more for presentation casting when you can measure a certain length of line and deliver it right to a particular fish you're hunting.
Okay, cool. And so, yeah, the typical flies are, it sounds like, just the typical stuff would work there. What about, can you take us down to the water and talk about how you, get yourself or clients into bonefish and just kind of describe that, how that looks?
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I should mention, though, before we move on from flies is eyes in Hawaii generally have a tendency to run a little larger than they do elsewhere. And that's just because the fish are in a little bit deeper water. Bonefish really are not built to look up. So you want to get your fly in that bottom third of the water column wherever you're fishing. And so I have a tendency to tie with a lot of dumbbell eyes, particularly the size medium ones in lead or, whatever coated colors you like with an eyeball on them. So with regard to looking for spots, please do feel free to reach out with questions to our website. Again, that's bonefishhawaii.com, or email us at info@bonefishhawaii.com, and we'd be happy to give you specifics on spots you might consider if you're on a DIY mission. But you're going to find on all of the islands where there are fringing reefs, you got anywhere between kind of 100 yards and 500 yards from a sandy beach out to the breakers. And that's where bonefish live about 80% of the time. And they might move out towards the breakers on one tide and then closer into shore on others. But pretty much you can be assured if you're looking out from a beach park or a home or whatever over a productive bonefish flat, they're going to be somewhere in that zone you can see. The places that they move back and forth between the breakers and the shore are generally sandy channels. And you can find those just because they're a little bit lighter in color than the rest of the surrounding coral heads, and also they might be slightly deeper. So posting up on any of those sandy channels is never a bad idea because the fish will be moving in and out, from the shore to the breakers or vice versa. The other thing you want to keep in mind as you're kind of scoping stuff out is there's a ton of live coral in Hawaii. And as such, it's brittle and it's very, very noisy when you walk. So you want to do a couple of things. One is have a super good pair of boots. Otherwise, you're going to be crying at the end of the day because your feet are all cut up. And the second thing is you want to move really, really slowly on bonefish flats in Hawaii. Even though you might not see a fish right out in front of you, if you take your time and wade slower than you anticipate the fish might be moving, you're absolutely going to be in the game. If you're walking fast and crunching as you go, every fish within a 100-yard circle is going to be gone. So take your time, wade easy. Look in those sandy channels and you'll be setting yourself up for success.
Cool. Yeah, those are great tips for sure. Okay. So basically, you get out there, find some of these slots either where they're, kind of migrating back and forth and just kind of sit there and wait. I mean, and you said there's a lot of blind fishing, but let's just take, I guess, back to Maui since that's what's on top of my mind. If you're down there, are you going to just kind of post up and just wait and for fish to come by and make the cast, or are you just kind of just casting blind more?
Well, I think that kind of depends on your personal disposition, Dave.
Yeah,
there's a lot of.
Well, to me, I'll tell you what. For me, I'm a total rookie. This is the great thing about this. This is awesome about I think fishing is that this would be my first. Technically my first salt. Kind of this sort of thing. You know what I mean? So it's when I think about what I would like to do, I like casting, but geez, if I could see the fish and cast to a fish, even if it didn't take. That seems like that'd be way better than sitting out there casting blindly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just depends on the person. On our guided charters, we both wade and fish out of the boat, and we use the boat to get around to some flats that are not accessible from shore, and that kind of gives you a leg up. And I personally, having had the opportunity to do this quite a bit and spend a lot of times with folks on the water, really the gratification of hooking a double-digit bonefish wading in shallow water, it doesn't get any better in fly fishing. Yeah. I've had the chance to fish all over the world, and that is really about as exciting as it gets. However, if you're on Maui with the family and you got an hour in the morning before the kids wake up, game on, man. Get that fly in the water,
Yeah, right. I'm not going to sit around and do nothing for an hour. Yeah,
exactly. So it kind of all depends. Yeah. And also the conditions. If the conditions are lining up and the water's clear and you can see fish moving, by all means,
what is that going to look like? So, are you going to right away see a fish moving and pretty much just be like, oh yeah, that's a bonefish? Or is there other species that I know they're obviously elongated and torpedo shaped versus say, the triggers, but are there going to be other confusing fish that you might think is a bonefish, which it isn't?
Well, that's all part of the really wonderful thing about bonefish and about flats fishing in general is you're learning every time you're out there. Most people don't have the luxury of flats fishing all year round. It's just once or twice or, perhaps more for those of us that are really fortunate deal. And so, you're slowly but surely going to build up a repertoire of images and experiences is going to tune you into what's a bonefish and what's not. Now, if you're in ankle deep water and you see a silver tail flopping around, 30 yards away, splashing and thrashing, you can be pretty sure that's a bonefish. But more than likely here in Hawaii, you're going to see fish that are cruising, laying low, going slow, hunting. And the way that I would suggest people, approach it initially is look for big and green, because most fish will be a little bit larger than you expect. And they can range from a neon green, having just come in from deep water onto the flats, to, kind of a more muted green if they've been in on a big tide for a while and have been, feeding in shallow sandy water. So big and green and moving slow would be my suggestions to get started.
Cool. Yeah. I'm just looking at your webpage and Bonefish, you see tons of photos of them, but man, when you just look close, they just look like it's just a cool looking fish. I mean, all fish are cool looking, but it's amazing. They have the counter coloration with the stripes on their back going, perpendicular to their kind of the lateral line sort of thing. That's an amazing looking fish. Do you see different colorations of bonefish, or are they pretty standard?
They range from cool to off the hook, beautiful fish. The neat thing about them too is, I mean, nothing's by accident, right? So a bonefish is designed to be stealth on the flats, firstly and foremostly for hunting, but then also to avoid predators. And so they've got those deep bars on their backs in Hawaii on a lot of occasions with that, dark green color. Yep. And then also on their sides, you're looking at basically a mirror with all these little scales that, disperse the light even more. So when you see a bonefish looking down and across at him, if he's traveling sideways to you, it can be very difficult at times to pick them up. When they're coming at you or going away from you, then the shadow along with that green will catch your eye a little bit better. That's why going slow is so key in most instances. Gotcha.
And is that, maybe you can talk just a little bit about, you mentioned the wind, but when you're talking about the sun and angle, any other factors to be thinking about to get yourself in a good position to, find, like, say you're in the area where fish are migrating, is that something, sun angle and wind that you should be thinking about a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very fortunate here in Hawaii in that we've got northeasterly trades, and we've also, of course, got the sun rising in the east. So mornings have a tendency to be a little bit more conducive to sight fishing in that you got the sun and the wind at your back. Oh, yeah. In the afternoon, of course, you're looking into the sun, and so you need to adjust your angles a little bit with the direction that you would be fishing a flat. And personally, whether I'm guiding or fishing myself, I pick a line where I can see. That's the number one most important thing, because you know what, if you can't see them, you're out of the game anyway. So, whether you're pulling across a flat or whether you're wading it, picking a line where there's some good light is definitely the ticket. In Hawaii, that's not always a given. We've got clouds that build up as they hit the islands, and that warm, moist sea air hits a couple of 100 feet of elevation and turns into a beautiful puffy white cloud. Well, those white clouds throw a monster glare on the water that you're never going to see through in most cases. So it's always good to pick the line that you can see, and regardless of the tide or where you're fishing. And
glasses, polarized glasses, is that pretty important up there?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't even show up without a good pair of polarized glasses. It differs between anglers. Different people perceive a little bit differently as they see with polarized glasses. But I find, for the most part, a lot of the stuff that you would take trout fishing, whether it's amber or bronze, those sorts of colors cut the glare really well. They also render the green of that bonefish pretty well. I would personally kind of shy away from some of the gray or blue colors, because for whatever reason, the bonefish just don't jump out at you like they do with an amber lens.
Okay. Yeah. Amber's the kind. Good. And, I guess, I mean, you get some clouds, but it's pretty, Hawaii is definitely more sun than not, right? I mean, even though isn't Maui known as the wettest place on the planet or something? Isn't that the case?
Close actually. Another island, Kauai.
And I wanted to
also some pretty good bone fishing.
Kauai, and I always said Kauai, but I think I was saying it wrong. It's actually Kauai.
Yeah, and so Kauai's got Mount Waialeale, which is arguably the wettest spot on Earth, and what's called the Alakai Swamp. And so it's this high elevation, big extinct volcano that's just a catchment for water. And then it's got 5 big tributaries that run out of it. And actually 3 of those 5 tributaries have fishable numbers of rainbow trout in them, if any of the guys are ever interested in checking that out.
That's cool.
So anyway, getting back to clouds, though, it's cloudy on a lot of days, particularly when we've got trade winds. The good thing about it is if you wait a minute or two, they usually blow over. So it's not uncommon to be out on a flat. Here's a big tailing fish coming right at you. All of a sudden, a cloud comes over, and you're like, where did he go? But that's just part of the drill here. You got to just take it as being Hawaii and, wait for those moments when it all comes together, where you do have good light and when you can see a little bit.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So yeah, just thinking back again, so we got the gear, basically we have the line, it looks like, airflow or reel. And was there a line you mentioned there I know they have some different tropical lines. Do they have one line, that's better than the others? Or I was just looking at one that they had there.
Honestly, It's going to depend on your casting stroke and your rod, and
Okay.
you get to a point where these will all work differently for each individual angler. For most people, though, I would recommend medium fast to fast action fly rod, saltwater safe reel seating guides, especially because just even a couple of days with a trout rod in the salt will toast your guides.
Right.
You don't want to go down that road. But anyway. The fly lines, try a couple. I mean, fly shops are really good at selling you stuff, and go into your local fly shop and bring your rod along with you and say, hey, can I try a couple of these lines, and make sure and put a leader on there, and, maybe even a fly with the point cut off, and try a couple of casts at 15 feet, at 20 feet, at 25, 30, 40 feet. And that kind of actually brings us to another thing about Hawaii. With the exception of blind casting, most of the casts in Hawaii are actually quite a bit shorter than you would find elsewhere. And two things have to do with that. One is it's just harder to see far with the broken bottom. It's a little bit deeper water, and the fish will have a tendency to sneak up on you. And with the wind and the waves and everything else going on, the fish don't know that you're there if you're moving quietly or if you're fishing out of the boat. So, you got to be accurate on your first cast, preferably. And I feed fish, the majority of the casts are going to be kind of 35 to 40 feet. I don't go much longer than that, because you want to make sure that it's their idea and that you show it to them just the way you want on the first opportunity, because your chances go way down after that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I'm just looking at the, airflow, and I'm just using airflow because I'm kind of a little more familiar with them, but the Superflow dry bonefish balance, line, which is a balanced taper for, and it says something about, I guess, again, they all look like they provide a similar thing. So, try one out. And I guess this would be one I could just probably pick up and be like, all right, we'll give this one a shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next thing that is now coming out with all the bonefish lines is they're changing up the cores. Before they were a braided monofilament core, and now they've got some new direct core designs that actually reduce the amount of stretch in the line, and that's really good in a bonefish context, because you want to be able, with one strip, to get the fish stuck when you see him eat in a visual context, or when you're just stripping it in. And sometimes having a whole ton of stretch in a line is a big disadvantage in the context of bonefish.
And they say that right here. I'm going through the benefits of the line, and it's like, here are their main benefits: climate control, tropical, this super dry, which is, some new stuff they have, power core, which is what you're talking about. You'll be impressed with the incredible suppleness and handling performance, even with the harshness, with only 6% stretch. I guess that's their power core, right? With less stretch.
Yeah, and that's the new deal that everyone's putting out there. And the lines that the manufacturers have provided me with recently are actually, they work better. I just like them better. They cast a little bit better, and you've got a lot of stretch in your leader and tippet anyway, especially with a longer leader. So it just takes one thing that you had to worry about in the past out of the equation. So try them out.
Cool. All right, so good. And so I guess let's just keep going down that road of, just to talk about, make sure I'm not missing anything here. So if I'm, again, sticking with that Maui example, so I'm going to go down early in the morning, find a place that I can jump out there and make a few casts. Conditions are going to be good. Anything else to be thinking about as I'm down there, if somebody's down there in Hawaii and they're trying to find a fish? Any other tips you want to throw out there? And now a quick word from our sponsor, the Fly Fishing and Tying Journal, your seasonal magazine covering fly tying, fly fishing destinations, how-to, short stories, and more. Here are a few examples of what is getting me fired up from the winter edition of the FTJ. Check out a story by Deck Hogan on big flies for the OP, perfect timing for our upcoming trip for the OP. Get the inside scoop from Dave McNeese down in Southern Oregon and his technique on dyeing fly tying materials. We also head over to the North Umpqua, then the Green River, and another story on the green butt skunk from Gary Lewis, kind of a history piece there on the skunk. I had Gary on the podcast as well in a previous episode. Lots of additional content in every episode of the journal. Head over to ftjangler.com and subscribe so you don't miss any of the tips, tricks, and stories in the next issue. That's ftjangler.com to get started today. And tell them you heard this ad on the podcast, and I'll find a way to make it up to you if you reach out to me at dave@wetflyswing.com. Okay, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So footwear is pretty key here in Hawaii. We've got everything from really tame wading on pretty mild sandy flats to some really gnarly rocky stuff. So you want to be thoughtful about footwear. If you have a good pair of wading boots that you don't mind hauling all the way over here, if you're coming from the mainland, bring those along. The manufacturers, whether it be Sims or Patagonia or
Yeah.
whomever Orvis, make really good flats boots now, and
Okay.
some of them are really reasonable in price, and you absolutely want to consider that, particularly one with a little bit of ankle protection. And
Okay.
a lot of people will wear, like they do wet wading out west, will wear some kind of a neoprene
Neoprene.
bootie underneath.
Yep.
Yeah. Just so when you get rocks in there, you're not like trying to change your, or get the rock out in 4 feet of water,
Gotcha.
with your fly rod. So anyway, yeah, having good footwear is pretty key. And then of course the Polaroid glasses. And then one thing not to overlook is if you're coming from somewhere perhaps that, like Portland, is not necessarily balmy and sunny at this time of the year, cover up from the sun, man. We're huge fans of Patagonia stuff. We wear Patagonia hoodie,
Mm-hmm.
fishing shirts on a regular basis every day. Skin cancer is something that, I've had to deal with growing up here in Hawaii and having fair skin. And it's something everyone should want to protect themselves from. So, wear lots of sunscreen on your legs if you're going to wear shorts. Otherwise, wear long pants. Wear, a good hat and a buff, even gloves if, you're fair skinned, and cover up from that sun because it'll toast you in a couple of hours with no problem here in Hawaii.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Okay. Cool. Well, let's, I wanted to jump in, we've covered, I think, a little bit of the Maui stuff. I want to jump over I guess over to maybe the stuff you do on some of your guiding trips. Before we get there, maybe you can just talk about, you mentioned this is, off on a little bit of a tangent, but the skin cancer, was that something, I mean, obviously that's a real thing that was something you actually had to deal with yourself?
Oh, it's ongoing. I've got this wonderful dermatologist I go to quarterly, and you show up at her office. She's a very attractive gal and very intelligent, and she's got a scalpel in one hand, a little bottle of liquid nitrogen in the other.
Really?
Yeah, man, it's just part of the deal growing up here in Hawaii.
No kidding.
Family's been here in the islands since the late 1800s, and everybody is ingrained in all of these activities outdoors, whether it's canoe paddling or surfing or sailing or fishing or whatever it might be. And when we were kids, I mean, there wasn't a lot out there as far as good skincare products for the sun. It was pretty much zinc oxide on your lips and your nose when you went out surfing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going for it. So being a little older guy now, I'm kind of paying for it. So please do encourage your kids when they're getting in the game. Having good sunscreen is just as important as a good fly rod.
That's right.
Take care of yourself.
So you pretty much, I mean, you're over a lifetime of it. You're just going to see little, a lot of them benign or whatever, but little potential things that are start to just for being in the sun, and you got to cut those things off. And that's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, we've got a cool little business here in Hawaii. We've been fishing and guiding for quite a few years. I drive a Mavericks flat skiff, and that allows us to fish out of the boat a little bit for anglers who are not quite so comfortable wading. Also allows us to get some flats that other anglers are not able to access by shore, to give us a little bit more wiggle room and take advantage of the prevailing conditions. And I spend 2-3 days a week on the water. We also do quite a bit of travel, particularly down to Kiribati in the Central Pacific. We do Christmas Island and Fanning Island and Canton Island with groups. Host 6-7 weeks down there each year, and then also we do a lot of steelhead fishing. We've been swinging flies for many, many years, and I guided steelhead fishing back in the 80s in Washington and Oregon, and really have a love for the Pacific Northwest. So we go up to the Skeena region of British Columbia. We've got a great lodging partner up there, and have been doing that both in the fall and in the spring for a number of years now. So anyway, the fishery here in Hawaii is one that, if people have not checked it out, whether it's DIY or a guided trip, by all means, get in on it. Like I mentioned earlier, our website is bonefishhawaii.com. And I'm Captain Rick Lee, and you can reach me at info@bonefishhawaii.com if you have questions or I can help you out in any way.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Did you want to dig a little bit into the Christmas Island and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are coming to Hawaii, it's always a great jumping off point to negotiate with your spouse to spend a week in Christmas Island. There's a charter flight that travels from Honolulu to Christmas Island in Kiribati. every Tuesday and returns the following Tuesday. It's about a 3-hour jet ride, very near the equator, and it's really a wonderful fishery. People tell me that it's like going back 100 years in time as far as the village and the people that live there and the fishery in general. For lack of a better description, the atoll's shaped like a tennis racket, and the interior of the tennis racket is about 145 square miles. So it makes it the largest atoll on the planet. And that interior lagoon is just covered with miles and miles and miles of white sand flats that are just teeming with bonefish, triggerfish, giant trevally. And then on the exterior of the atoll, there's also some hard flats with breaking waves just offshore and really wonderful fishing for bonefish, triggerfish, milkfish, etc. And then a pelagic fishery that's literally right outside of the breakers where you can catch big tuna, sailfish, wahoo, a whole variety of other pelagic species, and they're just a short ride from the lodge. So anyway, it's really reasonably priced. We put together both hosted and unhosted travel down there, work with a bunch of the different lodges on the islands, and have been going down since 1979. So we've got a very good understanding of the people and the place and the fishery, and be happy to help out anyone who's headed that direction.
Oh, cool. And what's a typical Christmas Island trip cost to get
right
there?
now, we've got lodging partners that start at $2,400 for the week inclusive.
That is that's amazing.
Yeah, so from a value proposition, it's a wonderful opportunity down there, and it lends itself not only to people who are on a first-time saltwater trip, but also seasoned vets. I mean, to go and fish for the triggers there. I have many clients who go to the Seychelles every year, some for 3 to 4 weeks each year, and they tell me the trigger fishing in Christmas Island is hands down better than they experience in the Seychelles. So it's a pretty neat fishery. The milkfish there are as good as anywhere. You can catch them on a floating seaweed fly in a line that sometimes can be a mile long of 15 to 20 pound fish rising like brown trout in a river. I mean, it's epic. There's some really great fishing down there.
Wow. Okay. And it's a similar deal. I mean, if you're going for, obviously there's a bunch of species you mentioned, but if you're going for bonefish or whatever down there, it's a similar deal as if you're fishing around Hawaii.
Tons of bonefish. The flats are much easier to wade. The fish are in much shallower water. The wading's a lot easier.
Yep.
The fish are on occasion a bit smaller. Most of the fish at Christmas Island would average 2.5 pounds, maybe 3 pounds on a good day. But the opportunity to catch 25 or 30 bonefish a day is certainly there every single day you're out. So it can be super prolific.
That's amazing. I think we're going to have to, I'll have to touch base with you after this is.
Yeah, let's get it together, Dave.
Sounds like
Love
pretty cool.
to have you down.
So I just want to touch on a couple things there. Back to the shoes again, boots. I mean, obviously I've got a pair of, big boots that are kind of clunky. I'm trying to just go light, like a little backpack with myself. I mean, is there a pair of footwear you would recommend that maybe is going to protect you, but isn't a huge pair of, Simms boots?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the ones that I wear quite a bit guiding now are Simms. I think they're a Marowalker, or no, that's the Patagonia. Excuse me. It's a Simms booty.
It's like a booty
specifically made
sole
for the flats, and those are excellent. Patagonia made one for many years. I'm not sure if they're still available, but they're the same thing. They look like a dive booty. They've got a zipper. They're neoprene. They've got a good solid sole on them.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's your typical. Okay, so those will be fine. Yeah, and those pack down. With those, you wouldn't need your neoprene booties because they kind of already have it in there, right?
No. Just a pair of socks and off you go.
Okay.
And we recommend those a lot for any wading destination, and they work fine, 80% of the time here in Hawaii. So
this is cool. This would be fun if I could put this together, because I was kind of planning on heading down and just kind of doing the family thing. But I think if I can put some stuff together here, I can probably make it work. And then also on the you mentioned the atoll. Can you just describe what that is exactly? What those are?
Yeah, so we were talking earlier about the progression of islands in the Pacific, which start out with a volcano that bubbles up basically from the seafloor up to the surface. And then over time, a coral reef is built around that island. And that's what we have going on here in the main Hawaiian Islands. If you go up into the Papahanaumokuakea National Monument, which is north of Hawaii, you'll find atolls and little islets where the actual lava portion of the island has been eroded over the years by wind, rain, and waves, and it just leaves the ring of the coral reef that was originally there. And so that's where Christmas Island and many of the atolls in Kiribati That's the stage they're in now, where it's just a fringing reef with an inner lagoon that's got passes out to the sea that'll allow water to circulate and fish to come in and out and that sort of thing. But on a large scale, I mean, literally on most days, you cannot see the far side of the lagoon at Christmas Island from the lodge looking one way across to the other because, the curve of the earth precludes you seeing the tops of the trees. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. Okay, so that's and then on Hawaii. Well, I guess let's keep on that one. I had a couple questions just about Hawaii in general, but did you want to touch base? We talked about Maui, but if we're talking about Oahu or, are there any other spots in Hawaii, any of the islands where it would be worth if somebody was going out there? It seems like, I've been to Kauai, or how do you pronounce it again?
Kauai.
Yeah, Kauai.
Yeah. So, why don't I go from one end of the island chain to the other? So starting with Kauai, of course, there's some great freshwater and saltwater fisheries there. Kauai has the largest lake of any of the islands, Waiata Reservoir, which is historically for sugarcane production. And Waiata's got peacock bass, largemouth bass, a bunch of other freshwater species that have been turned loose there. It's also got the trout fishing up at Kokee, which is nothing to really write home about as far as trout fishing goes, but it is pretty unique and unusual. And it's in a beautiful place with arguably some of the highest densities of endemic Hawaiian birds anywhere in the islands. Additionally, there's a couple of flats that are over on the northeast side of the island. The one that people want to really take a look at is Anini Beach, and that's Anini, Anini, which is on the way over towards Princeville. And there's lots of other flats over there that are a little bit smaller that if you find them on the right tide, you can find bonefish. But, there's lots of opportunities there. Then moving west, Oahu has the lion's share of flats. The areas that I really recommend people check out are the flats between Diamond Head and Cocoa Head, and that's on the south shore of Oahu. And there's pretty much about a 6-mile long flat there that's mostly residential along the shore, but there are a number of beach parks where you can pull in and, there's showers and parking and restrooms and what have you. And it's pretty self-explanatory when you get out there. Yep. Then there's a triad of islands moving west from Oahu, Molokai, Lanai, and Maui. Of course, we've been talking about Maui. Yep. Molokai has also got some pretty good flats along the south shore. It's a much less populous island. There's only about 8,000 people that live there, which is unusual considering the rest of the Hawaiian Islands. No stoplights. It's a cool place, and there's some really big fish there. It's beginning to get a little bit more notoriety. It is a fickle fishery in that the flats of Molokai are a little bit deeper, and there's been a lot of runoff over the last 100 years with axis deer and goats and what have you, knocking down the ground cover. And so a lot of times when the wind will blow in the afternoon on Molokai, the flats will dirty up. So you need to be kind of particular on the day you go and on the wind and the flat that you're fishing on that particular day. Lanai is kind of limited as far as flats go, in that the south shore of Lanai is pretty much sea cliffs. But Maui's got some flats, as I mentioned, both on the windward and leeward coasts, and you can feel free to Google Earth, look over by Kihei or in between, Lahaina and Ka'anapali area. Also, feel free to drop us an email at info@bonefishhawaii.com. We're always happy to help. And then moving on to the Big Island, because it's the youngest island and it's got 3 big distinct volcanoes, Mauna Kea, Mauna Loa, and Hualalai. And you may have been reading, last year there was a ton of activity over in the Puna area where lava flows went all the way to the ocean. It's mostly, lava rock and sea cliffs. And so the Big Island does have bonefish, and I have friends that live over there that do catch them occasionally, but it's much better suited for fishing for some of the other species we mentioned, the goatfishes, the moana, the kumu, that sort of thing, the bluefin trevally, papio, as we commonly call them here in Hawaii, and then a whole variety of other reef fish. And, if you're at a hotel on the Kona side of the island, just go ahead and Google map, some of the surrounding areas, or just go out in front and have a few casts with a little deceiver or some kind of another, little weighted fly with a floating line and a long leader and see what happens. So lots of fly fishing opportunities on all the islands, just some a little more suited to the bone fishing, like here on Oahu.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for the breakdown there. So again, I'm taking it back to, I'm walking out onto, early morning out on the water. got everything set up and I'm making that first cast, any, I just start casting it, but do you have any tips on presentation or stripping or, how long to let it sit in the water? Any of that sort of details? Any of those details?
Yeah. So of course you're going to be somewhat, dependent upon the depth of the water and the length of your cast. But for the most part, you want to try and get your fly near the bottom, but not stuck on the bottom. And so that's, always tough.
Yep.
If you are blind casting. So just work with different retrieve patterns. Usually little retrieves or slower retrieves have a tendency to stay near the bottom than real fast retrieves. Mm-hmm. Although you will catch those trevally with a quicker retrieve. When you're sight casting, it's also going to be it depends. You want to get the fly out ahead of the fish. We generally don't like to hit the fish right on the head because they'll spook 90% of the time. And you want to put it somewhere 8 to 10 feet out ahead of them, let that fly on the bottom.
Yeah.
And then by the time it gets to the bottom, you can start, with a little retrieve and gauge the fish's reaction to your fly for what to do next.
Gotcha. And that's like you said with a dry line. So you're just counting on the weight of your fly to get in. If it's what would be an average depth of water, say for, over in Maui or if you're fishing, what you're typically, a few feet?
Most of the flats on Maui are going to be knee to thigh deep if you get them on a good tide.
Yeah.
So you can see fish in there, but for the most part, they lend themselves really to blind casting. Although, a lot of times it's not uncommon at all to find fish right along the shore. And, there's a variety of places that I walk on a regular basis where I see, 2, 3, 4 bonefish feeding together, looking for stuff right in the surf line. So it just depends on where you are.
Gotcha. And on those flies, are you tying your flies, buying your flies from somewhere? Or what are you?
No, we tie all of our own stuff. Some of the fly companies that I might recommend, there's a great fly tying company out in Maine called SS Flies. Call Pete up at SS Flies and he'll hook you up. They're right on top of it. They work a lot with the more progressive guides in the Florida Keys on custom patterns. We work with them on Christmas Island stuff. They've got some great Hawaii stuff, and I wouldn't hesitate at all to fish any of their stuff. Enrico Puglisi also, they've got some really, really neat flies using those brushes, particularly the mantis patterns. And so those are all good. Just make sure that you get the ones with the heavier eyes so that they get down a little bit quicker.
Gotcha. Okay. And as far as fly tying, we're kind of in a fly tying season technically, although I like to mix it up a little bit. But, when you're tying some of these flies, do you have any tips for tying, say if it was, I don't know if the deceiver is the good one to talk about, but just generally, is it good to mix up weights, have a good selection in your fly box?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, to all of the above. Some of the things that I would say would be key with bonefish flies are pick really good hooks because you're not going to tie a ton of flies and you're not going to lose a ton of flies.
What are good hooks?
We've been using a couple of different ones. We've been using Tiemco and Gamakatsu over the years and had super, super good success with them. But now there's a couple of new entrants into the market, Arex and Kona, and they're both making some sticky, sharp, really nice looking hooks. And I've been tying a lot on both of them. For our Hawaiian bonefish, we also like to go with the 2X strong hooks in a general sense. Because bonefish will bend out a smaller hook easily on 15-pound tippet on a big run. So go with the heavier hooks. The Japan black hooks also in Hawaii have a tendency to be a little more productive, and that's all that I'll tie on. And then I'm a big fan of impressionism, and so I'll use a lot of Arctic fox, fin raccoon, coyote, some of the other more breathable materials that are out there for wings. I'll also use a lot of brushes, whether it's for crab patterns or for mantis shrimp bodies. Rubber legs are key in Hawaii, and we love all the rubber legs that are out there. A good resource that you can find pretty much anything that you're going to need for Hawaiian bonefish flies is Hairline. They're a manufacturer and distributor of pretty much the best stuff out there. So check it out, hairline.com, and they'll get you hooked up if you got any questions. Again, info@bonefishhawaii.com.
Cool. I had a few more, just kind of some tips and tricks and things I want to dig in before we get out of here. But I did have one kind of a note on the Hawaiian. There's this little thing, and maybe you can explain since you grew up out there, and it's amazing. Your family's been there since the 1800s. That's really cool. So, have you ever traveled or lived outside of Hawaii, or have you just been there the whole time?
No, I've been really fortunate to have been all over the world.
Oh,
I
cool.
started out with a summer job guiding up on the Green River in Utah back in the mid 80s, and was very fortunate through clients and connections there to have the opportunity to open a number of lodges in Colorado and Utah, and then also to travel to Argentina. I spent 7 winters guiding in Argentina and Chile
Hmm.
back in the late 80s and early 90s, and then also was able to spend a bunch of time up in Russia through the steelhead guiding I had mentioned earlier
Mm-hmm.
on the Kola Peninsula, which is up
Oh,
in
yeah.
northwest Russia, fly fishing for Atlantic salmon. And so I was on the Panoi River in Russia throughout the early 90s and helped to get that camp up and running. And for those of you that are, big Atlantic salmon fishermen, you may know the Panoi has pretty much now been recognized as the most prolific Atlantic salmon fishery in the world. And, back in the day, it was pretty amazing. I don't know whether I still have it, but for a while there, I had the camp record of 53 Atlantic salmon caught and released by 2 anglers in one day,
Jeez.
all on flies. Yeah,
Holy
so it
crap.
was a really amazing place. And then also have traveled extensively throughout the Pacific Northwest with steelhead fishing, throughout the Pacific with saltwater fishing, and across the American West with lodge development and guiding and what have you. So yeah, I've been
Wow.
lived a blessed life and met some amazing people along the way.
That's cool. So cool. Wow. So you basically, I mean, you've covered it all. And so, but Hawaii's been your home base. Has that kind of been the place you always have been going back to?
Yes, absolutely. My family's here. My wife comes from a similar upbringing, being from Hawaii, and we've got young Keiki, a couple of kids that now are getting into bone fishing themselves. The
Oh,
only
wow.
thing that I still need to do is teach them both how to push the boat so I can fish a little more.
Wow. And how old are the kids?
I've got a fifth grader and a sixth grader.
Oh, nice. That's
It's a
really
good
cool.
time.
Yeah, good stuff. So now, and that's why I wanted to dig into just a little bit on the culture. Hawaii. Since you're there, maybe you can shed some light on this, just for people that are going over there, because I think people don't. There's a little bit of this, right? There's you got the local native Hawaiians, and then you've got the white people. Basically, is that something to what should people know about that, and how do they make sure to do things respectfully? And is that an issue at all? It seems like that's always something you're thinking about.
Well, I think anywhere you go, it behooves travelers to take a minute to see what's going on in the local scene. And there are some really wonderful things about Hawaii based on the native Hawaiian culture and really a myriad now of neat things to do while you're here that are tied into native culture. I think it's important to keep in mind that the fishery here in Hawaii has been affected significantly by the native culture, in that local Hawaiians pretty much historically and even through today view the ocean as the icebox.
Yeah.
And so conservation is not what people might expect in other places. There are very few prohibitions with regard to saltwater fishing in Hawaii. Of course, you don't need a license. There's still monofilament gill nets on a lot of our bonefish flats, and that's something that we're, constantly working against. And I've got a good friend who's an ichthyologist up at the University of Hawaii, who's kind of regarded as the bonefish guru in the Pacific, Alan Friedlander, and he's pretty firm in his convictions that there's only about 10% of the historic number of bonefish that is, on our flats here in Hawaii that there once were. So, we're working on educating, and we spend a lot of time with kids groups trying to turn them on to the right thing to do and the good decisions to make. Because, with 1.5 million people living on a small island, many whom enjoy fishing, it's difficult to manage fisheries. And I think Hawaii is improving, but could do a lot better job of that down the road.
Oh, cool. And are there any local groups or anything that's anybody out there that are monitoring that or trying to protect things?
It's really limited in that saltwater fly fishing was very new to Hawaii up until, as I mentioned, 8 or 10 years ago. And so there are a lot more people getting into it now and realizing that bonefish is not just what's for dinner, but it's also an amazing sport fish and a great resource for people to enjoy and bring their families out to check out. So not many organized groups. There are some Trout Unlimited groups here in Hawaii that could turn you on to that fishing over on Kauai, particularly up at Kokei.
Yeah.
We've participated in a lot of environmental and conservation efforts with regard to tagging studies and help the the Department of Land and Natural Resources to try and improve their monitoring with regard to enforcement and that sort of thing. But it's a slow process, and it's difficult to change people's minds over just a few short years. It's something that's going to have to come from the kids who are moving up.
Yeah. Okay. So they're just like anywhere, there's going to be some issues that are going to continue. Well, okay. That definitely, there's obviously some work to be done. So I had a few little rapid fire around here. If you got a little more time to wrap this thing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the things I was going to check just on resources, obviously you mentioned, your website sounds like a good resource. Are there any other resources, either books, magazines, videos, anything, that could have some information on fishing Hawaii or Christmas Island that you'd recommend?
Currently there's not really too much. The one thing I would suggest is there are some online resources with regard to guides and guide services if you're interested in that. But ask the right questions and be careful and conscientious when they're doing that. There's quite a few people out there that are not captains, that don't have insurance, that don't have what you would expect when you show up in the morning for a flats trip as far as equipment goes, that sort of thing. So be careful when you're asking around and make sure that there's a good fit, because it's an expensive day on the water and nobody wants to be disappointed as far as that goes. There is one fly shop in town called Nervous Waters, and it's a smaller shop, and the guys are real committed and dedicated to the fishing here in Hawaii. And if you are on Oahu, they're up in the Kaimaki area, you might drop in and say hey, and they've got some fly tying stuff and a few flies and rods and reels and stuff, and that might be a good resources as well. But for the most part, it's going to be just reaching out to some of the guides that are here, or going on some of perhaps the blogs that are out there. I see a lot of people now posting on Facebook and on Instagram and some of the other social media with pictures of them holding fish. So I'm sure some of those guys have some insights and information that might be able to help a DIY angler. Gotcha.
Okay. So there's not necessarily like a ultimate guide to Hawaii fishing on a, sort of PDF download or something like that.
Dave, you ought to come out here and fish with us for a while and write one.
Yeah, I might have to do that. Yeah, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so cool. And is there anything else? I mean, we're going to jump in. The 222 is kind of how I usually start this off, kind of the rapid fire with the top two flies, top two tips and top two resources for, we're talking about bonefish in Hawaii. We talked a little bit on Christmas Island. I guess we'll have to leave that for, next time to dig in. But do you want to start there and just talk? You've mentioned the deceiver. Are there two flies that you'd recommend if people, wanted to grab two for bones out there?
Absolutely. So I think if someone was going to tie two flies, I would stick with the historic Crazy Charlie and upsize it for Hawaii in a couple of different colors. As I mentioned earlier, you want to go with maybe a dark brown or an olive. Also, an orange would not be a bad bet, and you want to stick with lead eyes. I like dark eyes personally, so whether it's plain lead or it's some of the coated lead eyes or a eyeball type of an eye, that's a good bet. Also, some kind of a mantis pattern. There's a whole variety of good ones out there. A good friend of ours, Terry Duffield, who guided here for many years, came up with one called Spam and Eggs. And that Spam and Eggs fly is a great mantis imitation for Hawaii, and that's a hard one to overlook. Additionally, the Enrico Puglisi mantis patterns are pretty good as well, and you can find those in the right colors with bigger eyes, and those will work here.
Okay. All right, perfect. And then what about, you've mentioned a bunch of good tips here. Anything else you want to throw out there for a couple of tips if somebody's going for bonefish out there in Hawaii and maybe their first time out there to help them find some fish?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing with bonefish in Hawaii is don't get too hung up on expecting to catch a whole bunch. You may step out onto a flat your first cast and hang a double-digit bonefish, but the reality of the situation is most days it's windy and it can be cloudy occasionally. Just go out and have a great time and take it all in and enjoy it, because I guarantee you, whether you catch fish or not, it's going to be a great experience.
Okay. And do you have a tip for casting? It sounds like the wind, obviously, if you can get it at your back, that's fine. But if you're casting into the wind, any tips for somebody?
That's my daily to-do list with guests on the flat.
Exactly. So, that's the first thing.
A couple of things that I recommend for people. First and foremost is you want to rush it because the wind's blowing in your face.
Yeah.
Take your time on your stroke, slow your tempo down, and be deliberate and powerful. And then secondly, I always suggest that if guests are struggling with the wind, to cant their rod down closer to the water and kind of sidearm it, because the breeze is significantly less as you get closer to the water. And that quite often will help people to really kind of slow their stroke down, as well as get that fly in a place that's going to turn over and make it stay there.
Gotcha. And then once you get out there, like you said, the strips are kind of more of a maybe a little kind of a quick inch sort of strip, inch versus a big long pole.
That's one, but a long pole is also going to be super successful here in Hawaii for the fact that that's the way a mantis shrimp would feed or would swim. And then the bonefish accordingly will feed on that mantis shrimp, not necessarily on the strip, but on the fall. In fact, most of our patterns will be taken as they fall versus stripping them. So you'll strip once, you'll have slack as you reach for your line. When you strip that next time, you'll be tight.
Oh, gotcha. So try a long strip and then stop, let it drop, and then maybe like a 2-second count and then strip again, let it drop and then strip. And I mean, how much are you mixing up your strips and how much are you mixing up your flies? I mean, are you changing flies every, if you're not getting anything and switching it up, or are you sticking with one?
After spending as much time as I have out here, I have particular flies that I fish a particular way on particular flats. So I know right away after one or two fish whether it's going to work on that day or not to change. But for the general, person who's just out kind of winging it, I would just experiment around and getting back to what I'd mentioned at the beginning, fish a dark fly over dark bottom, fish a light fly or bright fly over bright bottom. That's going to be your best bet. And then, the biggest thing is just going to be whether the eyes are heavy enough or too heavy, because you want to be in that zone, but not be hanging up too terribly much. And, quite often going with those long strips over those shorter strips will have a tendency to keep the fly perhaps up a little bit more. But it just depends on the speed of your retrieve and the depth of the water.
Okay. And are you throwing a little bit of flash or anything into your flies?
As a general rule, I go pretty light on the flash here in Hawaii. The fish don't respond to it quite as well as they might in other places. And I don't know if that's just because they've been there and done that, or if just the natural prey items that they're encountering are more dull in nature. I might put a little bit in, but not very much in a general sense.
Okay. All right, cool. And so, you mentioned, it sounds like you've got Sage, and as far as rods, it looks like I was looking at your website, you've got some of the big, the good big companies out there. Any other, I guess if you look at a non-fly fishing piece of gear, anything that's kind of a go-to gear that when you're out there traveling, you don't leave home without?
As far as spin fishing goes, or
no, this would be just any type of gear. I always think of traveling, like if you're traveling, but is there any it could be just generally any gear that is a go-to piece you got to have. I think of some of the random stuff. I was just listening to an old episode of Landon Mayer, and he mentioned that he loves taking the noodle, those noodle things for kids to float on. He cuts those up, and that's how he wraps his rigs for like trout fishing, and so stuff like that. This random stuff you'd never think about. Do you have any of that?
That's a great idea.
I know.
No, the nice thing about it is most 4-piece rods you can carry on with no problem, and there's no issues with regard to travel with those.
Yeah, just carry them on.
I'd say travel light more than anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, when I go fishing, dude, it's a
what do you
pair
take?
of nippers, a spool, a thing of tippet,
15-pound,
and a couple of flies. Yeah, just take a thing of 15-pound or 20 if you want to make sure and land most of the fish you hook. So
that's all you got. So you don't go out there with any sort of a vest, Roy, or you just, you got your shirt. You can put everything in your pockets of your sleeve, your shirt, right?
Isn't that how it gets when you've done something for a while? You just try and simplify,
Yeah.
So when I'm guiding, I have a big full bag with, everything that anyone might possibly need. But when I'm fishing myself, man, go light. That's one of the beauties of bone fishing. All you need is a pair of boots, a good rod and reel.
That's right. Well, what's in that bag that you haven't used lately? Like something that, that old rule, like if you haven't used it in a year, you should get rid of it. Do you have anything in that bag like that?
Dude, I carry stuff like a spare pair of glasses in case people have a blip. I've got out on the flats literally with clients before, and they just can't see fish. And I said, man, let me check out those glasses. And they were some fashion eyewear. Well, the old trick when you put one polarized pair against the other and turn them at a 45, they change color. Well, no polarization on this guest's glasses. I said, dude, let's try this and, turn the day around. So those ride in my bag pretty much all the time, but I don't use them too much.
Yeah.
I don't know, cigar nipper and a lighter occasionally for that celebration stove. That doesn't get used too much. But it's key to have it in there. So
that's right. What's your go-to drink when you get off the water?
I would have to say I'm a bourbon fan. I like a nice aged bourbon.
Yeah.
I don't have a drink very often, but when I do, I think that's what I would indulge in.
Yeah, cool. And what about, as far as music, we're doing a podcast here, but, if you had to, are you more of a music person or a podcast person when you think of audio listening to stuff?
Oh, I don't listen to podcasts too much. Obviously, with my replies, I've been a little slow on the uptake and with getting all the gear setting up. But I do love tunes, and I think when I'm out on the flats fishing, I was out a couple of days ago. I'm kind of an old schooler, so I had a little bit of G Love and Special Sauce mixed in with a little Grateful Dead.
Perfect. Jack Johnson is out there, right?
Jack, being from Hawaii, you got to love Jack Johnson.
Yeah, he's good,
and that goes with the flow with bonefishing. So that's
right. Yeah, he's the type of guy I would expect to be a fly fisherman. Just he seems like, I guess he's a surfer, so that's similar.
Similar
deal.
No, fly fishing fits right in. And it's interesting you should say that, because a lot of the people that have been really getting interested in fly fishing and traveling to Christmas Island with us lately are folks that live on the North Shore, where during the winter, of course, they've got big surf and it's a real vibrant scene with people from all over the world. But come summer, man, it's kind of quiet, not much going on. So, weaving in a little bit of bone fishing to that program has been key for a lot of our folks lately.
That's cool. And you made, obviously you've got a huge, a lot of stuff going on in the fly fishing space. If you weren't doing this fly fishing thing for your life, what do you think you'd be doing?
We're also real avid dog trainers and wing shooters. And
cool.
So we have Brittany Spaniels here in Hawaii that we love to run for some of the upland birds that we have here in Hawaii. And we also work with occasionally with some bow hunting here in Hawaii for axis deer, mouflon sheep, goats, that sort of thing.
Yep.
So we love, sneaking and peeking and spotting and stalking.
That's it. God, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. So there's actually, there's birds out there. You can do some bird hunting.
Yeah. I was just out yesterday with a couple of the dogs and had a nice pheasant blow up right in front of us. So it's fun. We've got pheasant and Franklin, 3 varieties of Franklin and chucker. And there's not as much area on Oahu to hunt as there is perhaps on Maui or the Big Island or Lanai or Molokai. But, got to get out when you can.
Cool. All right, Rick. Well, I think that's about all I have for you. I guess in the next 6-12 months, anything you want to let us know you got new coming out for, from you or the business personally, or anything new?
Just keeping at it, thanks, Dave, for taking the time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And please do take me up on either coming over here to Oahu to chasing a couple if you get the hall pass.
Yep.
Or if you feel like doing Christmas Island, we'd love to have you down on one of our trips coming up in 2020.
Okay, cool. And if the people out there want to connect with you, it's just bonefishhawaii.com.
Absolutely. Our Hawaii bone fishing is bonefishhawaii.com. We also work very closely with fishchristmasisland.com.
Oh, okay.
You can check out either of those sites, and both of them kind of point back to each other. So they can help you out.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'll leave links to everything we talked about in the show. And, I think there's going to be some people I sent a thing out on Facebook. It was kind of like, any questions about Christmas Island or Hawaii? And, some people were like, definitely go more on Christmas Island. So I think there's going to be some people that might, not be fired up. But I think this was great. We dug into Hawaii, and, it gives me and hopefully some people out there a better perspective and tips. So appreciate you sharing your knowledge, and I'll definitely keep in touch with you. Okay, Dave. Mahalo. It's been great being with you. All right. Thanks, Rick. See ya. Okay, man. Bye. So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/Rick. And if you want to find out more info on upcoming Christmas Island trip, you can get more info at wetflyswing.com/salt. And we'll be doing a giveaway here soon, so I can send you some information coming up on that. Thank you again for your support. I'm looking forward to hopefully catching up this soon and maybe see you online or on the river. Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.